Centennial and Central. It's called Fairways, and they're always packed. I mean, they have 2 entrances and they're packed with entrances. We went on Friday a lot of times they do, which Denny likes and my mom down to see that. They do food over rice. And this rice is got cake goes on that besides. Delicious. And the side it's like $20. There's a huge piece of
You gotta be careful, right?
Oh, wow. Normally you can't get in that place.
I've not had to wait the last 2 times I've been there.
Really? Which one did you go to?
Off of Holland and Airport there?
Yeah, okay. The one that was here first.
Yeah.
That's the one we go to.
But I got reservations. Yeah, reservations.
Oh, they didn't used to.
So we're all, there's gonna be 9 of us going there. That's what was really good.
But they would have, even then, even with 9, they didn't carry you out the door.
Yeah.
And around the building.
It's just about time to get started here. And before we begin, let's have an opening prayer. Ron, would you mind doing our opening prayer?
Father in heaven, we're thankful that we have the freedom to get together and study thy word with promise of everlasting life. We would ask that you bless the teachers, that they might have a ready recollection of the things that they have studied and want to bring forth for our hearing. We may take these things and use them in our everyday life to thy glory. Be with the sick and afflicted, ones that cannot be with us. You know their problem better than we. We just ask you to be with them and comfort them and guide them. We ask everything in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ron. All right, last week we left off in Genesis chapter 26. We're at the very ending of the chapter. And when we looked at chapter 26, we went through the story of how initially Isaac, when he was confronted about his wife, Rebecca, whether he was married to her or not, he lied to Abimelech, the king, or whether it's a lie or half-truth. I don't know how you want to classify it. But the fact is he said that she was his sister, which in that culture, that is technically true in a sense. But like we said before too, that sometimes it's clear that God judges us by our motives. He judges us by our intent, by why we do certain things. Sometimes certain things may appear to others as being wrong, but God, in his great wisdom, can view our hearts, and he knows what we do and why we do it, and to him that is far more important than the act itself, is the intent and the purposes of the heart. And that's how he looks at things. And in Isaac's particular case, sometimes it's hard to tell when certain biblical characters do something that appears to be wrong. Sometimes you can view God's reaction as perhaps whether he views this as a serious problem or not. In Isaac's particular case, does God seem to punish Isaac for saying that Rebecca was his sister? No. It doesn't appear so. As a matter of fact, if anything, he blesses him tremendously. After that, makes him extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, to the point that even his enemies come to him and ask for a peace treaty because they become aware that God has blessed this guy. So how they determined that, I have no idea. But whatever it was, God was working behind the scenes, blessing Isaac in many ways, and even among his enemies, to the point where his enemies want to form a peace treaty with him because they could tell that God was with him. So clearly Isaac was a godly man at this point in his life, and he seems to be blessed greatly by the Lord. In the last paragraph, though, we didn't really read that paragraph in chapter 26, verse 34. And this kind of sets the theme of what's going to happen in chapter 27 and half of 28. There's a story that comes out of this. Once again, this is one of those stories, just doing a surface reading of it, I doubt very much you really can grasp the full meaning of what's really going on there. You got to really research it a little bit and dig deeper into the story to figure out what's really going on. But in verse 34, I'll read there, 34 and 35. When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Ben the Hittite, and also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Okay, it's stating a fact. Esau married whom? Hittites, and two of them, correct? He was 40 years old at this time, and he goes off and marries them. Remember, how did Isaac get his wife?
It's chosen for him.
Yeah, and Abraham and Sarah did not want him to have ungodly or idol worshiping wife, so they make a special effort to send him back to their relatives. And for some reason, Isaac does not seem to be in the picture as far as Isaac picking his two wives. Whether they had a discussion or not, we don't know, it doesn't say. But apparently Esau goes ahead and does this, and I don't think at his point in his life at this point, he realized how bad a thing he did by doing this. It's going to come out later on in the chapter when he finally, light bulb goes on, he finally realizes that he didn't do the right thing.
Jeff, isn't it like that for everybody though?
Go ahead.
Honestly,
Yeah.
like you don't know how bad it is until you're kind of like down the road a little bit.
Yeah, that
The
is
sins of our youth.
that is life. You are right about that. And Isaac clearly didn't realize what he was doing and perhaps how bad it was, or maybe he knew. Maybe he didn't care. I don't know. It doesn't really tell us what his inner motives was in his mind. So, but this is going to be a huge issue as the chapter comes out, because once again, scriptures maintain throughout the whole Old Testament that the sons of God marry the daughters of God. So that's his point is godly marriages is always in God's mind. Chapter 27. We're going to begin reading. I'm going to read 1 through 4. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons and your quiver and bow and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare for me some tasty food that I like, and bring it to me so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now, before I discuss his age a little bit too, we need to look at, what verse was that again? Make sure I get this right. What was Isaac and Rebekah have different opinions of their two sons. And that goes in chapter 25, verse 28. What's the relationship between the twins and their parents?
Favoritism.
Yeah. What kind of favoritism? Spell it out. What exactly was it?
Esau and Rebekah.
Yeah. Is that a problem? Yeah, it is a problem. And why it's a problem will become more evident as we go along in the story. And it's kind of strange because when you look in chapter 27, some of the reasons come out of why certain people like certain people, and we'll look at that when we get to it. First off, the chapter announces right off the bat in verse 1, Isaac was old. How old was he? It's
Old enough not to see.
Can't see.
Yeah, which depends on your age, that can
He
happen
was
at different
old
ages.
when he married Rebecca, so
Yeah.
he would have been maybe close to 80, 78 or 80.
It's actually more than that, believe it or not. I was surprised too when I looked it up.
One of the things also is that we have to take into account that at this stage, Esau and Jacob, they were older guys.
Yes.
You know, sometimes when we think about the story of Esau and Jacob and what went on like right here, we tend to, our minds tend to gravitate that they were young guys.
That is true.
Now remember the text says in chapter 26, he was 40 when he got married. Then it moves on. Isaac is old. So that means this must have been many years later. So if he was 40 when he got married, this maybe he was 60 by this time, right?
That might be the average thinking.
That's
You're
right.
not probably off for just thinking normally that would be the case.
Yeah, and then also again now it says Esau's wives cause problem. It lends also the idea then that one of the reasons is not just favoritism why Rebecca does what she did, right? I can get back at you. His wives didn't treat her right. I can get back at you and get my favorite to get that. So
Perhaps.
these are things that we also have to take into consideration.
We do.
It's not just that, oh, she loved Jacob more than Esau. But you have to take into all the things that come with it.
That's why I
Builds up
said,
that.
that's why I said from the beginning,
Yeah.
you just can't fully grasp what's going on here from a surface reading.
Right.
You have to do a little research. And according to the commentators who do the research on this stuff, and I trust their opinion more than my own, Isaac was 137 years old at this point.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about this too, is he's 137 here, but he lives to be 180. So when he says, I'm old and don't know the day of my death, is he exaggerating perhaps a little bit? I don't know, maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he wasn't feeling real hot, or a bad week, or a bad month. I don't know, I can't say. But whatever it was, he was reacting in a way that wasn't really in tune with what reality was, because he lives another 40 years. So, but he has this scenario set up. Why he sets it up at this point, is it just because of age, or is there extenuating reasons that aren't brought out fully in the text? We don't really know. So, but when he does this, he decides to make a decision, and his decision is to go to Esau and what? What's he want Esau to do?
Well, he wants Esau to hunt for him. And
Yeah.
game.
Yeah. And one of the things it brings out in the text, that Isaac loved wild game to eat. And Esau was a man of the wild, he was a hunter, he was out there hunting and doing all his manly things, I guess you'd say, bringing in game. And his dad loved wild game and to eat it, and it made him very fond of Esau as a result of it. So, but in this conversation, does it appear at all that Isaac talks to Rebekah about his decision to bless Esau? It doesn't seem to be in the text. And as the text goes on, we're going to find out that I don't think there's enough evidence to show that he did not talk to her about it. And this is a big deal. Why is this a big deal? Him blessing Esau, is that a big deal? What was the tradition in Hebrew culture when it came to the firstborn son versus the other sons? The firstborn got a double blessing, a double portion. But there was more to it too. The firstborn son, let's see. The firstborn son was head over the family. They had the patriarchal blessing and spiritual office with the abilities from God to pass it on to the next living son later on. He had dominion over the nation of Israel. He gets a double portion of the estate and the righthood of the priesthood of the family. Because back then, the family priest was the firstborn son who was anointed by God in that position to be the leader spiritually for the clan, for all the members of the clan. So, does Isaac have the right to bless Esau with this blessing?
Yeah,
According to Hebrew culture,
yeah,
yes.
but,
But go back to Genesis 25, verse, make sure I get the right verse here. I think it's 23. Yeah, go ahead and read it, Rick.
The Lord said to Rebekah, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will come within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.
What does that mean?
Esau is not supposed to get the blessing.
No. God overrules the traditional.
I was gonna say, do you think, we always wanna say Rebekah favored, I think she favored him because of the Lord speaking to her.
That is
Yeah.
certainly possible. It doesn't specifically say that, but I would have a tendency to think that's probably part of it. We can't say for sure because it doesn't spell it out exactly, but it does seem to be that way. And at the very least, she's doing the right thing. For whatever reason she's doing it, it is the right thing to do because it goes along with the prophecy of God that Jacob was going to get the firstborn rights in the family, and he was the one that was going to be blessed by God as part of the spiritual family of God, just like Isaac was blessed at the time of Abraham. So at this particular point, is Isaac doing the Lord's will by trying to give Esau this blessing?
no.
He is not.
And also, Jeff, going back again to 26 and those last 2 verses, it shows that God knew what he was doing when he said Esau wouldn't be the one. Because look who Esau chose to be his wife. How would he then be God's priest if he's choosing wrong people to be his wife?
Yeah.
Right? Idol worshiper.
Yeah, that is part of the problem here too. As time goes on, it's going to become even more and more of an issue as things go along. And as I said too, it doesn't appear that Isaac confers with his wife Rebekah about this decision to bless Esau. And his main reason, it seems like he wants to bless Esau, is because of food. He likes wild game. I mean, and he's fearful because of his state of health. I don't know.
Jeff?
Let's read on.
Jeff, I have a question. You referred us to 25. In 25, Esau had already sold his birthright. So, if he'd already sold it,
Well, yes, that was towards the end of the chapter. Yes, you're right.
but I mean, so he sold it and now he's upset about it. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, and we're gonna get to that point. I'm glad you brought that out because it becomes an issue later on, and Esau says some crazy things later on that refers back to what you're talking about. So we'll get to that later on. So anyhow, let's begin reading again in verse 5. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke with his son Esau. And when Esau left for the open country to hunt for game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father saying to your brother Esau, bring me some game, prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully to do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say and go and get them for me." Is that right? Rebekah, even though Isaac doesn't appear to have conferred with her, does she hear what the plan is? And she does. She hears it, and she starts thinking about this, and for whatever her reasoning is, it's hard to say, but it does appear that God had prophesied this, but she calls for her son Jacob, who is her favorite, and gives him a job to do. And is this Jacob's idea to do this? Oh, this is totally from his mother. And she's got something she wants him to do, and she lays out the plan, and he starts questioning in verse 11 the plan. And how does he question her? What does he say to her? What if my father touches me? Oh, Jacob's not a hairy guy like Esau, and his father's going to immediately recognize that, and he's worried that as a result of that, what's Isaac going to do to him? Instead of blessing him, he'll curse him, and he doesn't want to be cursed. So his mother says to him, this is interesting, "My son, let the curse fall on me." That's interesting. She's taking responsibility for it, but she says, "Do what I say and go do this." So who's Jacob obeying?
His mother.
Yeah, his mother. He doesn't appear to object to what she's doing.
No.
He knows it's deceitful. He's going along with the plan.
Yeah. Interesting. So as things go along, we're going to see here too, we really don't know Rebekah's motives completely, and we don't really understand where Jacob's at. At this particular point in Jacob's life, there's no scriptures that confer to us that I could find, unless I missed it, that Jacob was a strong worshiper of God at this point. It doesn't seem to be mentioned, at least at this point, what his relationship was, but it does seem to appear that Rebekah was a godly woman, for a couple of different reasons that we see. How godly she really was, I couldn't tell you, but it does appear that she was definitely not an idol worshiper, because what was she upset about with Esau? The Hittite women. They were idol worshipers, and later on it comes out very clearly that these idol worshiping women who were his wives thoroughly disgust her to the point where she said, "My life is not worth living." That's how upset she was with these idol worshiping women. So that's a pretty strong statement to make about your daughters-in-law.
It's also interesting that she remembers, I would assume she remembered what God spoke to her directly about the younger serving the older, or the older serving the younger. And here she's evidently taking things into her own hands to make sure that happens, instead of allowing God to work it.
Yeah.
But unless this is God's way.
You raise a good point in that there's just no way you could logically conclude that she does not remember what God said about the twins, concerning that she knew Jacob was going to be the blessed one. She knew that. And she formulates this plan here to make sure Jacob does get that blessing over probably the objections of her husband at this time. And obviously he's not thinking clearly at this point, but we'll get to that later on. So there's a problem here.
Jeff, it's just another example of these women taking things in their own hands, though. We just keep seeing it over and over.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah, it's not good, and this really comes down to some real tricky questions about God's will. And this whole scenario, how it plays out, and what does God do in reaction to it, and how does he deal with these people through their dishonesty here. So I'm going to read again in verse 14 now. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food, the way his father liked it. And Rebekah took some of the best clothes of Esau, her son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. Then she handed her son Jacob the tasty food and bread she had made. These goat skins, too, the actual Hebrew word, refers to a particular type of goat that had black hair that was very smooth and very similar to human hair. So she knew which kind to use on him. She dresses him in Esau's clothes. Why would she do that? The smell. And the feel of it too was probably something that, and she knew how to cook for her husband. She knew what he liked. Verse 18, so he went to his father and says, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done what you told me. Please sit up and eat some of the game so that you may give me your blessing. Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly, my son? The Lord, your God, gave me success, he replied. So, does Jacob lie to his father?
Yeah.
Is this an absolute outright lie?
Yes.
Was it the intent for him to deceive his father? Was he trying to save his own skin or something like that? No, this is an absolute out and out lie. But, as we see, as time goes on, things change a little bit. Notice he also says in verse 20 this very curious remark. I'm not sure, I should have checked to see how other versions read this, I didn't look. It said, the Lord, your God, gave me success. Did your versions all say that?
Mine's, yep.
Yeah.
What does he say? The Lord,
Your God,
your God. What does that mean?
not his.
It does imply that, doesn't it? Now, is he saying the Lord, your God, gave me blessings and success today because that's how he really felt and he really wasn't a follower of God? Or is that a remark that he thought Esau would make? Esau probably clearly would have said something like that, because he obviously wasn't a worshiper of God. But did Esau say it for which reason? Which of those two reasons? I really can't say. It doesn't appear that he's a strong follower of God at this point. So how many lies does he tell, him and his mother? There's quite a few. There's at least 6 that I could see that there's absolute out and out deceptions of Isaac by Rebekah and Jacob. Verse 21, then Isaac said to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. Uh-oh, what's going on here?
Identification.
Yeah, he's getting a little suspicious, isn't he? Verse 22, Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him and said, are you really my son Esau? He asked. And he says, what? I am. So, series of many lies as they went on. It seems like Jacob, or Esau was, or not Esau, Isaac was a little suspicious to the point where I don't know how he would overrule the sound of the voice. I don't know if he was just smelling the food and was getting really hungry. I don't know what his reason is for not inquiring a little bit more, but nonetheless, the trickery results in a positive result. And then in verse 25, and then he said, my son, bring some of your game to eat so I may give you my blessing. So Jacob brought it to him, and he ate and brought some wine and drink. Then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went to him and kissed him. Then Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, and he blessed him. and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the heavens dew, and of earth's richness and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." After Isaac had finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. That word scarcely, that word kind of hit me a little bit. What does that word, why was that word scarcely put in there? It kind of implies something, I think.
Almost got caught.
Huh?
Almost got caught.
You almost got caught. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but I think this shows God is acting. God is directing this whole scenario to a certain extent that he knows the timing of things, and he could clearly dictate when Isaac gets back. He could create all kinds of obstacles for Isaac to slow him down or to speed him up and getting back to his father. I think this implies a little bit of God's plan in acting out this whole scenario. Now, does God approve of all these lies? One of the best ways you can see, perhaps, of why God doesn't approve of this is there's some results, consequences as a result of these actions of Rebekah and Jacob. The Bible virtually closed hardly any further references to Isaac in scriptures after this point. There's not a lot mentioned about him. Rebekah virtually loses both of her sons. Jacob, her favorite, leaves home, and the records show she may never have seen him again after this point. Never has seen her favorite son again because of this plan. Esau is further estranged to his father and mother. Jacob suffers a lot of hardships, and he gets deceived himself by his uncle Laban, and he turns him into almost a virtual slave. And the unity of Isaac's family was irrevocably shattered at this point. So there was consequences for all these actions that they did. But does that mean it wasn't God's will for it to happen this way? It's an interesting question. And there's some scriptures that seem to indicate that. Now, the question would be also at this point, I want to make sure I want to get this right. At this time in his life, did Jacob deserve this blessing?
No.
No, he did not. Let's turn over to,
Jeff,
yes.
you made a comment just a minute ago that said, is there evidence that God didn't intend it, or did or didn't, I don't know where you put the negative there, intend for it to happen this way? It doesn't necessarily mean God intended it to happen this way, which is maybe why there was consequences. Whereas if God intended it to happen, he fully would have made it happen in his own way, in his own timing. The same as what we saw with Sarah and her wanting to bend the timing of this son for Abraham. And so I don't know that we'll really know whether, well, I'm interested to hear what you say.
Yeah, we got it. I'm going to use a scripture to try to illustrate this point a little bit, because God's plans are far more complicated sometimes than we realize. And there's things going on behind the scenes in this story, and that's true for every one of our lives. There's things going on in our lives that the Lord is working on for each and every one of us that we may not be aware of. Turn over to Romans 9, because there is some insight in scriptures very often that tell us what people are thinking and what God's thinking about certain events when they happen. And in Romans chapter 9, we get a little bit of insight into this. It also opens up a huge issue concerning God's sovereign choices in life for everything that he does. Just a basic question too, can God use the evil actions of an evil person to accomplish some good? Absolutely.
He did it with Babylon.
He does that. So with that on the surface, I think most people realize that beginning in verse 9 of Romans chapter 9, or I'm sorry, verse 6 of Romans chapter 9, and this is complicated, I'll give you that. It is not as though God's word had failed, for all who are descended from Israel are Israel. Not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. What does that mean?
Part of God's body,
Huh?
out of the holy Israel. And that part of God's body, they're just Israelites.
Yeah. Now, what's Jacob's other name later on? God renames him.
Israel.
It is Israel. So he could be very well talking about Jacob here. Not because they are his descendants, are they all Abraham's children. On the contrary, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And in other words, it is not the natural children who are God's children, but is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. For this is how the promise was stated: at the appointed time I will return, and Sarah will have a son. Not only that, but Rebekah's children had one and the same father, our father Isaac. Yet before the twins were born or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose in election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger. Just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all, he says to Moses. For I have mercy on whom I'll have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Therefore, it does not depend on man's desire or effort, but on God's mercy. And the whole rest of the chapter talks about this. And you could get really confused reading this whole chapter about what God's will is in a lot of things. But you got to understand it's part of a bigger picture. And the main point he's trying to make in this chapter is just because you are from the physical descent of Jacob or Israel does not mean you are children of the promise of Abraham. Abraham's children are children, in the way the scriptures refer to, who are the spiritual family of God, not necessarily the physical family of God. And that's the big point he's making. Now, the other point he's making here also, too, is God's sovereign choices and what he does and why he does it. Because, and when people complain about God and his will sometimes, verse 19 says, one of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us for who resists his will? And this verse is interesting, verse 20, but who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Wow. That is a slap down by God. Don't question me. I know what I'm doing. You don't. In this particular case, he's going back to the reference that he hated Esau and loved Jacob, loved Jacob before they were even born. Is that just? Neither one of them had done a thing wrong. And God declares before they're even born, before they had done a thing, that one of them he's going to hate and one of them he's going to love. Is that just? That goes back to the complaint where people say, well, why did God make me this way? Who are you, old man, to talk back to God? Is it just or not?
It is just.
It has to be, yes.
Why is it just?
Because God is always just.
God is always just.
Not only that, but we have to remember that he sees, as you keep saying, you keep using this phrase, the big picture. He saw ahead of time who would do what. Esau, nobody caused Esau to despise his birthright, no matter what.
That was his choice.
It was his choice. No one forced him to marry the Hittite. All of these choices that he made, God saw them ahead of time. He knew the type of person Esau would turn on to be, without anybody forcing him.
Yeah. And it also says in other places too, it says he was an immoral man.
Right. With Jacob, it's the same thing. He knew where Jacob would end up, even though Jacob's growth came when he left his father's house. When Rebekah sent him back, Isaac and Rebekah sent him back to her father to find a wife. That's where he grew.
Now, by saying that, because God knows the future, does that mean he forced Jacob to be a good man and forced Esau to be a bad man? Now, later on in the chapter, it says God used the wickedness of the Egyptian Pharaoh to bless God's people. Now, see, that gets complicated a little bit. But the fact of the matter is God, even though he knows the future, he knows what we're going to do way before we're even born, he still doesn't force it on us.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this is turn over to Proverbs 16:9. This verse has a little bit of reference to this. Proverbs 16 verse 9. I've always loved this one particular verse because it says something interesting. The whole chapter in chapter 16 of Proverbs kind of hits at this a little bit here and there. Verse 9, chapter 16 of Proverbs reads, "In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps." What does that mean? A man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. What does that mean?
He allows it to happen.
What do you mean? God allows what to happen?
Of course.
Okay, so we have free will.
We do.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, when you determine your course, that's a free will expression. But the steps, the Lord determines the steps. What does that mean? We have free will. We determine which way we want to go in life. Esau and Jacob made a choice, but the Lord determines their steps.
He guides
What does
us
that
in our
mean?
steps that we take. If you've made the wrong decision, he helps you to make the right decision with your steps.
He
He
can.
guides you.
He can, and he tries to do that, I think, with every human.
Or it can be harder or easier.
Yeah, it can be. All the events in our life. Can you honestly say, perhaps, if the Lord directs a lot of things in our lives that we don't even realize he's directing? Mary Jo?
God has a plan. He sees the big picture. And he has people that are going to do things. He intended, let's say, he intended for you to be a Bible teacher. When you were born, you didn't know that. When you were growing up, you didn't know that. But you grew into the position because of what circumstances you were put in and that you chose. You're groomed. You're groomed for this position.
That's an interesting word, groom. What does that mean? Not referring to me, just all of us in general. Does God groom us?
Yes.
He surely does.
Guided and molded.
Does he allow events in our lives to happen that's going to affect us in lots of different ways? What's those scriptures that talk God disciplines his children for their own good. He makes events happen that can be good, it can be very hard and vexing and traumatic in our lives, but he's doing it for our own good to change our hearts and to mature us to the point that he wants us to get to. He did the same thing with Abraham. And Abraham passed every single test. Isaac, I'm not so sure he passed every single test. And I don't think Jacob did either. But does that mean they're bad, evil men?
No.
No. Just like the rest of us in this room. We all make mistakes. We all do things that are wrong. But is our heart still in tune with God? And God knew Jacob's heart was going to be attuned to him. And he knew Esau's heart was not going to be. So he set up blessings as a result of that, and he declares way ahead of time, I know the future, and I will determine each of these individual steps. So we're gonna have to stop there, we're out of time. Any final thoughts or questions? All right, we'll see you next week.